We give thanks this day to the one, as Hebrews reminds us, the one who is in a sanctuary now, not built like this one of wood and paint and of human hands, but one that is timeless and eternal, and Jesus is there, and Jesus does not continue to make these sacrifices on our behalf over and over and over again, but it was the once and for all sacrifice of Jesus that empowers us and fuels us and brings us here together. And it is His name I pray, in His name I give thanks. Let us pray. Oh God, for the stories we are told throughout the Bible, for these that we approach today out of Hebrews, for the stunning announcement of who it is that Jesus is and will always be, and for the story that we approach about a time of offering, a time of giving. Let us focus today on the question of how. God, as we do that, I pray that you help us clear our hearts and our minds and center us into this very moment so that we may be attentive to what it is you have to say to us. And it is in Jesus' name, the eternal one, I pray. Amen. We continue on in the Gospel of Mark as it parallels with Hebrews, as Jesus, well, I'll mention it in a sermon. This is the last bit of this chapter where he's doing these series of teachings, teach, and I can only imagine that it's exhausting for him because of the kind of questions he's being asked and proposed, and then these answers that he's given. And so here we find him at the end of that kind of a two-parter. It's the ending of a teaching. We begin today with the teaching, and then it's this scene that we find ourselves in. So as we listen intently to the scene. We are told that as he taught, that as Jesus said, he said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted in the marketplaces. And they have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour," is the word he chooses to use, devour widows' houses. "And for a show they make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." He goes on. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a fraction of a penny, the NIV tells us. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth. This poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And thanks be to God, pastors will tell you, when the stars align and the lectionary gives you something on giving in November, and the church plans a potluck for that very same day. So we pray for a captive crowd, guys, a big captive crowd. Consider this your stewardship sermon, okay? This is it. You're here. And here it is, right in front of us. Yes, let us approach it with a question. This is the question that seems to be, when I read this, the question of the day. And that question is, how much? So let us take to it. Let's explore this question of how much today. Now, when I think of these two words, I have to say that these are culturally and societally loaded words, I think. This question, how much, is loaded. And maybe you'll agree with me. I'll tell you what I mean. What I mean is that maybe you already asked this or are asked this all the time, it seems. How much? Day in and day out. How much is a question that we use that can consider so many things in life, I think. How much is a question, right, of value. How much is something worth, right? How much? How much does it cost? How much is a measurement of time related to value sometimes? How much time do I need to spend on this thing, whatever it may be? How much are they asking me to put into this thing? And what will I get in return of my how much time? Or we ask ourselves, how much energy am I going to have to expel on this, right? Always, it seems to be a question of amount. How much do you need? How much does it cost? You need how much in response? Then we ask ourselves, how much is too much? And how much is enough? Today, this day, as our church plates, proverbial speaking, are overflowing, and let me give you an example of how it is overfilling and overflowing. We had Faithful Fusion rehearsal at 8:30 this morning. Then we had play practice for the Christmas program at 9 o'clock. And now it's in the midst of Sunday school that goes on. And then Faithful Fusion is here playing now. And then we had a potluck that we were setting up for all the while that was going on, right? There will be a tear down and clean up later. That's before the extra cantata practice, right, choir? This afternoon. We can't help but ask ourselves, right, how much? So today, as we celebrate Thanksgiving by giving thanks together with nothing better than a potluck, and as we approach also this day, let us not forget, as we approach the 11th minute, right, of the 11th hour on this 11th day of the 100th anniversary of what was the war to end all wars. As we turn to a gospel story about a woman who gave this amount in the shadow of abundance and before the sight of Jesus, we ask ourselves the question, how much? The question of how much is at the center of this for Jesus. And you know, more than we know it, this story needs explanation. It has to. And if for no other reason, it needs it to answer this, because maybe this is uneasy for you, as it is me a little bit. Is Jesus truly telling you and I, through this example, to literally give everything we own to the offering jars, as the woman did? Because that's what she did, right? Everything she owned, money, went into the jars. Is this what the example is for? And if that is so, no one here is following the teaching of Jesus set out, including me. So is that what he's saying? And if he's not, what is it then? So this story deserves more than face value interpretation. And this story needs to be told to us as we here, just like the woman, we stand to give our offering to God in the shadow of our abundance and in the sight of Jesus. So let us dig in a little bit to Mark's Gospel. It is the second half of this story, the half with the woman and the 2 coins. It comes at the end, as I mentioned, of this lengthy, emotional, and draining teaching series Jesus was doing. Let's review what he was doing here. So this is this chapter alone, while he's in Jerusalem. He blasted the religious elite with this parable that he told. It was about this vineyard, and there's this vineyard owner who is God, right? And he goes away, and he puts some people in charge of it, but then some bullies come, and they beat up the people he put in charge of it, beat up more people, and finally they kill the son of the landowner. And he's telling this all the while in front of the religious elite, and they know it's about them. And then he tells them right after that that the stone that the builders rejected, that has become the cornerstone, pointing to him. Then he answers this trick question about paying taxes that they had, right? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And then he answers this question, complicated question about marriage and the resurrection. What's it going to be like? And then he taught, this is what we did last week, the greatest commandment of what it was, and answered this question. What is the greatest commandment? It is to love God with everything you have, heart, soul, mind, and it is also to love your neighbor as yourself. And then he named specifically, without telling a parable or something, specifically the scribes and teachers of the law. Watch out for them, he said. Watch out, because here's what they will do, he said. Here's what they'll do. They will dress for respect, and they will want respect in return. They will make sure that they have their robes go all the way to the ground, so it's almost complicated to walk in. So they are forced to walk slowly to get where they're going on purpose. They will make sure that they are prominently seen no matter where they go. In the synagogue, that means sitting actually facing the crowd so everyone can see them up there. At a banquet, that means at the main seat. And all the while they do that, they're going to be cheating the most helpless out of their homes, i.e. the widows of the day. They will devour them, Jesus said. And then what they're going to do is they're going to turn around and they're going to pray these extravagantly long prayers to justify before God and everyone else what they did and that they're right in doing it for all to see and hear. Jesus was calling them out. And that is right here. That is what it is right here. And what he was calling out in that day was the convenient and all too seductive, because they fell into it, marriage of political power and religion, in which you will find those leaders. It was the ones who found the way to prominence using God as their ticket up, right? The truly evil ones among you. He said. Watch out for them. So he just concluded that. After that, he needed a change of scenery, I think. So Mark doesn't give much detail, but all he says is that he changed locations, right? He needed to change his scene. So he left there and he sat in this busy courtyard in front of the temple. That's where we capture him now, to do a little bit, really, of people watching. He's sitting and he's watching people do what they do. It was there he watched people give their offerings to the treasury. And that scene is important to imagine as we approach this. It looks something like this. The temple treasury actually had what was called trumpets, okay? And that's because they were shaped as such. They were these big vessels that had a big bottom, and then they came up like this, and that's what you put money into, and they were sitting out in this courtyard. And there were multiple receptacles, okay, for your offerings to be all going to the temple treasury. But you got to designate where you wanted your money to go to the treasury. Each one of them was designated to certain things or projects that were going on that they needed. Or just regular operational nuts and bolts things like the supplying of oil for the sacrifices, one of the trumpets was. So imagine that now. Designation, right, of your money. It now therefore became a thing of show to show just what and how much you were going to put in to support the temple projects, right? Now you can imagine it, right? In the shadow of abundance, Jesus watched this. Now certainly these teachers were among them because they had to be seen. Maybe they were even standing by the trumpet that they wanted someone to put something in, with their long tasseled robes dragging on the ground. In the shadow of abundance, Jesus watched. And he watched as this woman, without a name, with no words, we're told she's a widow. Now maybe she's one of these widows who lost, remember these people devoured widows' houses. Perhaps she's even one of these widows who lost her house to these elite groups. We are told she approached one of the trumpets, and she, without anything, slipped 2 coins into one of them, and then she turned and she walked away. How much? Jesus gathered his disciples at that moment and he taught them. How much did she give? Well, she gave more, Jesus says. But not really. She didn't give more, did she? She didn't give more much. But how did she give more? It comes to an idea of relativity. How much is a penny? I don't even have one on me. Well, how much is $100? I definitely don't have that on me. How much is 1,000? How much is 10,000? It's all relative. It all becomes relative. And I'm going to show you how it becomes relative. Okay? Give a shiny new penny to a small child for their piggy bank. And you tell me how much value that penny has in that moment. That penny is going to have a whole lot more value for that kid than it had for you in your pocket. In the shadow of abundance and before Jesus, the question has now shifted. It has shifted from how much to actually a much more profound question. How? How much is easy because it's technical. We can count how much. Remember I said it's a measurement. How much drove the giving of all the rest? How much is technical? I could tell you, if I figured it out, in order to have a balanced budget for 2019, Faithful Shepherd needs every giving unit to give on average X amount of dollars per year, right? How much is technical? How much is technical? I give $1,000, I give $5,000, I give $10,000. How much is technical? Asking how becomes a lesson, an exercise in spirituality. Because there's that deep chasm and divide between how the rich filled the trumpets and how the single woman filled the trumpets is what Jesus witnessed, observed, and blessed that day. In the shadow of abundance and before Jesus, how much doesn't concern Jesus nearly as much as how does. So the question is, how do you give your $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 to Faithful Shepherd Presbyterian Church? How does your giving affect and reflect your faithfulness and your trust in God? Not how much, but how. And when it comes to giving, I'm here to tell you that how has a name. How has a name that we can identify. The word how, the way to give how is sacrificial. I believe Jesus yearns for you and me, just as the woman did, to have enough faith in God to give sacrificially and not just charitably out of abundance. Not how much, but how. The woman's example is extreme. It is extremely extreme. But you know what else is? It is Jesus' vision that he taught his disciples about carrying their own cross. That is an extreme example of discipleship. So was it extreme that when Jesus asked these first disciples to just leave their dad right where they have him and follow him, leave their families on the spot. That is extreme. Jesus taught with extremes to prove extremely important points. To truly follow this way, his way, you have to trust that God will give you your daily bread. You have to. To truly follow his way, you need to have the faith that would give up everything in order to faithfully follow him. Giving sacrificially means that you feel your giving. And you will know when you enter the realm of a deeper faithfulness, when your monthly and your annual budget reflect sacrificial giving to God. You will know when you get there because you will feel it. And I know there are some here that can tell that story. I know it because I've heard a couple of them. Whether it be the discipline of tithing, if that's your choice, or whether it be another amount that is sacrificial. Because remember, how is more important than how much. But I know that some of you can tell the story of cutting back on things that you want or you desire in a given month or a given year in order to keep giving sacrificially to God. I know you can tell that story. You know what sacrificial giving and living feels like. In turn then, when you know what that feels like, then I know that you know what faith feels like when it comes to how you approach the offering plate. Just like that woman knew what faith felt like. In turn, you know what the blessing of turning around and walking away, just as she did from the treasury, knowing, trusting that you will have enough for tomorrow. Some of you know what that feels like. I know it. For others, the journey may begin now. It was in our session meeting last month. We were talking about the topic of sacrificial giving, that we agreed amongst one another that sacrificial giving is a journey and a process, not an immediate and sudden thing. It is not quick, it is not but it is step by step. And wouldn't you know that every journey, no matter how great or big it is, right, begins with one step. And it is the journey to follow Jesus begins with one step, and that step is a step of faith. A pledge sheet can and will reflect your faith in God. It can. It is not about how much. It is about how. And I speak the truth that we are entering a season, right, where many, many people will want you to give. And that includes your church, right? This is the season. So perhaps, as we go into the season, we can ask ourselves, not how much in response, but maybe we just ask ourselves, how? Especially when you are bombarded with how much over and over again. Because in the shadow of abundance and in the sight of Jesus, we gather together before the treasury with what we have and with who we are. Brothers and sisters, let's pray. God, we gather together. Help us at this time consider the question of how. You have given us out of your abundance. We live in a land of abundance. Let us consider how. Oh God, give us the courage to have faith and trust in you that our daily bread will be provided and that we have everything that we need. It is in Jesus' precious name I pray. Amen. Well, would you look at that? It's time to pick up our offering. We do that every Sunday at this time, don't we? We do that as a response to God's grace that is spoken.